Good morning, folks. This is Mr. Dan coming to you from the Landscape Design Classroom. Today we're going to talk about choices to make when building a greenhouse. The main idea here is, what do you need to consider when you're building or expanding a greenhouse? As you can see here, this is a nice picture of some tomatoes growing in a fairly large greenhouse. You'd see a greenhouse like this attached to a school like Central Westmoreland down in Newstand. Ours is a little bit similar, but ours is a little bit taller. It takes a little bit more sunlight and has a different type of heating system, but we'll get into that. So there's a lot of different greenhouses, types of designs. The type of structure is influenced by efficiency and productivity. You understand the advantages and disadvantages of each type, which we'll get into. Choices of frame type, covering, heating system, and more. But let's get into selecting the type of greenhouse. So we have a freestanding Quonset, single gable, and gutter connected ridge and furrow. So the unit that we have here at the school is a single gable. So more on structures, lean-to greenhouses. These go up against a building. They share a wall with a larger building. Typically, they're going to take their heat from that building as well. The roof leans against the common wall. It's a limited size and primarily for home gardens, so you won't see that with like an educational institution. And the detached greenhouse, which we have here, these are favored by most commercial growers because having a greenhouse connected to a building is fairly dirty, actually. You end up tracking a lot of mud in, so any commercial growers are going to have multiple greenhouses outside that you can go walk from one to another and then take your storage wherever you're going to take that. So Quonset greenhouses, most common type of detached greenhouse. From personal experience, this is what we used at our nursery for years before we ended up getting out of that area of the industry. So arch rafters and solid end walls, and then you can put a piece of plastic over top. Restricted growing area near the side walls. That's one of the disadvantages. The closer you get to those walls, the harder it is to bend over and get stuff from down there. Sometimes you end up on your hands and knees working with plants, which really isn't good ergonomic health over time. And current trend for non-permanent high tunnel greenhouses. So a lot of these Quonset greenhouses going up, they're not going to stand the test of time. They're going to have to be rebuilt over time. Some of the ones with the plastic are just cold frames. So that's when you put a piece of plastic over top of it. They actually, most of the time, aren't even heated. So as you can see from the ones right here, these are heated, but there is a lot of cold frame houses that they're not going to be heated at all whatsoever. The single gable is what we have here at the school. It's a pitched roof like a house, and straight sides and two gable ends. And the last one is gutter connected ridge and furrow, and they kind of look like the single gable, but they're just more connected. But you can have a very large greenhouse this way. So may or may not be able to have internal walls below the gutters. Typically when you see a structure like this, you're not going to see any walls in it. It's pretty rare, actually. More efficient without internal walls. That means you're spreading a lot of heat around, or even a lot of cooling whenever you have the fans running. You may have gabled roof or curved arches. So with a gutter connected, the roof can play a big part into how sunlight's hitting the plants, how the greenhouse is being heated, but we can get more into that stuff a little bit later. So key parts to a greenhouse structure. Your rafters, this is your primary roof support, so you see that over in here. Your purlins, those are horizontal supports between the rafters. So any of these like supports are super important just because, one, the main part is they're going to keep that building up. Side posts and columns, that's your vertical supports. So all these side posts. And then end walls and side walls enclose the structure, and they may be vented. So framing materials. These are materials used for framing: rafters, purlin, and side posts. Aluminum is the most economical and longest lasting. Aluminum is getting more expensive over the last few years, so sometimes greenhouse growers will save a buck, but they won't have something in the long run. So wood deteriorates pretty quickly. I would highly recommend not using wood. I know on our current greenhouse, we have to replace the wood every few years around the door frame just because there's so much use. And then steel, it's a stronger, heavier, and more costly than aluminum, but it has potential for rust. So if you're building a greenhouse, I would definitely recommend spending a little bit more money than wood, but don't buy steel because rust over time is going to decay, and eventually you're going to replace that as well. So covering materials, or greenhouse coverings. So we have some necessary things here. We need light, we need durability, and depending on your company you work for, affordability. So a greenhouse traps the sun's energy and keeps the plants warm. This is good and bad. So if you're in a climate like the Northeast here in the United States, you definitely want a lot of sun coming in because over the fall, winter, and spring months, you're going to want that heat. But you're also going to want a good venting system because it's going to get very hot in there in the summer. So sometimes you end up keeping the door open and running those fans all day long. So some of the materials you're going to use for this are fiberglass, glass, polycarbonate, and polyethylene film. So a lot of the greenhouses in this area are actually built with fiberglass and polycarbonate. It's actually been a really long time since I've seen anything built out of glass. So glass is a covering. It's the best for light transmission. I kind of debate this a little bit though, because when you have really focused light coming in through glass, sometimes it tends to burn the plants, especially after watering. Costly structural supports, glass is very heavy. So you want to be very careful putting in a glass greenhouse because one, it breaks easier, and two, you better have some really good supports because glass can be very, very heavy. So has a high initial cost, very high maintenance cost, and it's limited use, like I was saying, because sun coming in through a glass greenhouse can really heat that guy up. So fiberglass is a covering. Advantages are they're rigid, extremely durable, and less extensive structural supports than glass. The disadvantage, susceptible to breakdown by ultraviolet lights with reduced light transmission and lifespan as short as 5 years. So if you have a fiberglass greenhouse, eventually you're going to have to replace some of your coverings. So you have a lot of light hitting it over time. I would recommend anywhere between 5 and 10 years. So polycarbonate, this is typically what you're going to see at most educational institutions. Strong, translucent, and rigid, costs less than glass, and is available 2 ways: corrugated single or a flat twin wall, good for cooler climates. So the flat twin wall is typically what you want to have here in Pennsylvania because you have 2 panes. You have 2 panes of polycarbonate, and what it does is it traps that heat within both of them and heats your greenhouse for a longer period of time. So it's easily cut for installation and one of 2 most used coverings. So polyethylene film, it's commonly used as a double sheet inflated with air. These are typically used on cold frames, but can be heated. So not rigid, but enough support for normal operation. You end up, like I said, you end up replacing these a lot more over time. So one of the 2 most used materials and lasts 3 to 5 years. Initial cost is low, but you're gonna end up spending more over time just due to replacing it. So high replacement maintenance costs, so that's the trade-off. You might have a little bit less cost in the beginning, but you're gonna end up paying more in the end. So a thick polyethylene is really where you wanna be. So head house. This is a space supporting production, but not necessarily where crops are raised. So a lot of plants are going to be taken from other greenhouses and brought in here to be made up for product, to be split, to be propagated, pretty much any of that kind of stuff. So storage for supplies and chemicals, this is where you're going to want to keep all that good stuff for helping plants grow. Cooler workspace for planting, transplanting, and harvesting, like I was just saying. And an area for receiving, shipping, utilities, and office activities. So yes, you can have an office in the greenhouse. It might get a little bit hot, but you can definitely keep your stuff there. So heating requirements. Solar heat is not enough for year-round production, especially up here in Pennsylvania. So most common energy sources are coal, oil, and gas. Our greenhouse here at school is a gas greenhouse using resin or heaters for a radiant heat. So energy choice based on the cost and local supply and demand. Whenever you're putting up your greenhouse, you really need to research how you're going to do that. Your heating costs are a huge chunk of what you're going to use. I know if we ran our greenhouse all year long, it'd be pretty costly. So that's why we don't typically run it during the winter months. So heating with gas. It burns efficiently. Venting needed to remove toxic fumes. That is the most important. Gas is highly noxious if you keep it in a confined space for a long time. So, and then heat distribution through polyethylene vent tubes. And heating tubes are placed under plant benches for heating efficiency. So ours are overhead in the greenhouse, but we also have seating mats to keep them warm underneath. So boilers with hot water. This is my personal favorite. It's more common in northern areas. So hot water is used for underpot heating, constant temperature for growing medium, improved plant growth, and reduced energy costs. Because when you're using steam, you get that moisture off of that steam that's coming into the greenhouse, and that actually helps plant growth. So that'll get on the leaves, down into the soil and onto the roots, helping promote the growth. So controlling heat levels. Thermostats are used in the greenhouse and other environmental controls. An appropriate number of sensors throughout the production area. You want to make sure that you're getting an even heat throughout your greenhouse. So those will let you know if there's any issues and where the greenhouse, where it needs to be properly heated. Thermostats out of direct sunlight and facing north or in a protected location. And greenhouse ventilation. Ridge vents at the top of the greenhouse, that's what we use here at the school. Gable end vents, we use those as well. And then fans throughout the greenhouse. So we're 3 out of 3 on what we're using here at the school. So the purpose, you want to prevent hot spots. You want to provide better air movement. So if you have no fans in your greenhouse, then you're probably going to have some issues with plants not being able to survive within really hot conditions. So you want to keep that air moving at all times within the greenhouse, because the structure itself is generally not going to let air in unless the vents are open. Or even if you open the door, but you're going to get minimal wind in. So temperature control, and then disease and pest control. So sometimes you want to make sure that the exact temperature outside is the same as inside, because pests typically like to live in warm environments. Some of the stuff we've dealt with in our greenhouse has been white flies and aphids. So anytime you have that stuff, please make sure that you have somebody that is pesticide certified in Pennsylvania to take care of that. So that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, please contact me down in the Landscape Design Classroom. Have a great day, folks.